This moth is the pine beauty, Panolis flammea, and it lives in many British pine forests. It's usually found in small numbers when it causes little damage to pine trees. But the moth population suddenly reached pest proportions in a forest in Sutherland in the north of Scotland. Huge areas of young pine plantations were laid waste. The trees were defoliated so completely that they all died in a period of weeks. The outbreak in 1976 was the first to occur in Britain, and because the moth had not previously been found in Sutherland, the Forestry Commission were taken by surprise. The sites affected had been open moorland. A North American pine tree was planted here because it grows well on poor waterlogged soil. The lodgepole pine, Pinus contorta, had been successful in other parts of the country, and the plantations in Sutherland had been trouble-free for 10 to 15 years, so the Forestry Commission had no reason to anticipate problems. Is this why no precautions were taken? John Stokely, an entomologist with the Forestry Commission, explains.
There's no point and there's no economic reason for carrying out monitoring, which is an expensive and laborious proceeding. The other point is that in the year before an outbreak occurs, there will be large numbers of caterpillars present, but they're not readily seen. And by definition, in an outbreak, the population has escaped from the controls, the regulating factors, which keep the population small, and numbers in this situation can rise very rapidly indeed, so that one has a big jump from the year before an outbreak becomes evident to the year of the outbreak. And this is really a great problem. And even then, the signs of the outbreak are, in the first place, the damage, the defoliation which occurs, and that probably won't be spotted until halfway through the feeding period. In the case of pine beauty moths, the larvae feed for 6 weeks, and the damage won't become really obvious until at least 3 weeks has gone by. So then the forester sees what the problem is and looks and can find the caterpillars, and they can then be identified. So unless there's a monitoring system, one is faced with a rather shocking situation.
So it's the caterpillar stage of the moth that does the real damage. To prevent future outbreaks, caterpillar numbers must be kept under control, and the best way of achieving this depends on the moth's life history. A caterpillar develops from an egg laid by the adult moth. This is the tiny first instar larva. It hatches in late May to early June, and it goes through 5 larval stages. With each molt, the caterpillar increases in size as it feeds and grows, until by the end of the 5th instar it reaches about 30 millimeters long. During July, the caterpillars bury themselves in the ground and pupate. The pupae remain in the soil from July until late March. The first adult moths emerge from the pupae in late March, exact timing depending on the weather. The moths live for less than 6 weeks, during which time they mate. The female lays her eggs on pine needles between April and mid-May. These soon hatch, and the life cycle begins over again with the first instar larvae. So what are the possibilities for applying control measures? For more than half the year, the pupae are buried in the soil, but very difficult to reach. The moths spend much of their short lives flying around, so they're not an easy target. The eggs are fixed and exposed, but they hatch within days when the weather is warm enough. So it's the caterpillars that are the most vulnerable stage of the life cycle. They are accessible because their movements are confined and they're feeding over a 10 to 12 week period. So the best control measure was to attack the caterpillars directly. They used an insecticide in the following May-June. The insecticide was a special preparation of a bacterium, Bacillus thuringiensis. The bacterium affects only the caterpillars of Lepidoptera, so environmentally it was a very safe choice. Caterpillars feeding on pine shoots coated with the bacterium would be killed by bacterial toxins released in their gut. But the majority of the population survived. Why? The reason had to do with the feeding behavior of different larval stages. The first two instars only feed on the youngest shoots. They are less likely to ingest the bacterium because they suck up internal plant juices. The older caterpillars, with more developed mouthparts, move on to devour older needles, but by this time they may be less susceptible, or there might be little active bacillus left. This intensive feeding on both young and old shoots explains why pine beauty larvae are so destructive. The trees are stripped of all their needles, new and old. Having failed, the Forestry Commission had to wait until the following season to try again. This time, they used a more potent but less discriminatory insecticide, a chemical called phenitrathion. It worked, giving a 98% mortality. So this solved the immediate problem. The next task for the Forestry Commission was to find ways of monitoring population levels. If they could do this, new outbreaks could be predicted in time to take preventative action.
Ten, 11, 12, 13. It's this row. Now we need the 8th position. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is it. Right, give me a tray.
One method of prediction involves taking a census of the number of pupae overwintering in the soil.
Let's have a side plate. Another one.
Quadrats of soil in various locations throughout the forest are examined.
Right, now we can start sorting this. Bring the tray up.
The number of pupae found give an estimate of the population size at the end of the summer season.
Nice one.
Actual numbers vary from 1 to as many as 300 per square metre, but an average of 15 to 20 is taken as a warning sign of infestation levels in the spring. Even if large numbers are expected to emerge, before spraying a census of moths is taken. A recently emerged moth dries itself in the sun for several hours to expand and harden its wings. With its yellowish-brown forewings and a large furry head, it's not surprising that the pine beauty is also called the owl moth. When its wings are folded closely together, it looks like a scale-covered bud. It's remarkably well camouflaged. Males and females are not easily distinguished. Both sexes spend much of the day resting among the pine needles, but come dusk they frequently make flights in search of a mate. It's this behaviour that John hopes to exploit by setting traps that should prove irresistible for passing males. Inside each trap, John places a small rubber bung that has been impregnated with sex pheromones from female moths. The odour released should attract potential mates from far and wide. The traps are set up in pairs. One has a high dosage of pheromone and the other has a low dosage, and acts as a backup should the other trap become too full. Males that enter the trap are held in a sticky solution. The size of the whole population can be estimated from the number of males caught, because the sexes occur in approximately equal numbers. Another index of population abundance is the number of eggs laid. After mating, the female lays her eggs in short rows. She produces a total of 100 or 200 per season. The number of eggs found on trees confirms whether the threat is serious enough to warrant spraying the forest that year. But these methods are laborious and time-consuming, so are they really successful as an early warning system?
We were able to nip in the bud an infestation at a forest on Speyside. In this area also we have carried out pheromone trapping in the subsequent years and have a good record now of the changes in population level over that area.
On a map of Ecology's forest on Speyside, we can show the result for the winter of 78-79 when they carried out a pupil survey. There were two areas where the pupil counts were high. Pheromone trapping in the following March gave high values over a rather wider area, though excluding one of the high pupil locations. And the third indicator, eggs per tree, confirmed the picture. Based on these indicators, an area of the forest was sprayed in June 79. This covered both the areas with high pupal counts. In the following winter, a different part of the forest gave high pupal counts, and the sprayed area had relatively few pupae. Pheromone traps gave a similar picture, so the spraying had been effective. 3 years later, pheromone trapping revealed that the population had built up again in the sprayed area. There was still some effect of the spraying. The new distribution was less extensive than the earlier one. There's another interesting point, and it's related to soil type. In parts of the forest, the trees grew in deep, unflushed peat. The areas with high pupal counts coincide to quite an extent with this soil type. Perhaps trees growing in this soil could be specially susceptible to attack by pine beauty. Evidence from other Scottish forests suggests a general increase in caterpillar numbers in 1984. So it seems possible that there's a cycling of pine beauty, with high and low populations separated by periods of 5 to 6 years. If this is true, it'll be necessary to spray every few years, and there's a great danger of contaminating soil and rivers with insecticides that could affect valuable species such as salmon. For the long term, a better method must be found. Further research on moth pheromones at Southampton University has the aim of developing a mating disruption technique. There are 3 pheromones released by the female to which the males respond. One acts as a long-range attractant, another acts as a more specific orientator and landing stimulus, and the third pheromone initiates copulation. We're about to test the response of male moths to female pheromones in a wind tunnel. In dim light simulating dusk, the moths are released into an antechamber. A dummy female is placed on a platform at one end of the tunnel. It's saturated with a cocktail of all 3 pheromones. Air is gently sucked over the bung and down the tunnel. An invisible trail of pheromone vapour is created and should lead the moths to its source. The moths are attracted to the area around the platform, and eventually one lands. It's completely fooled by our dummy female and attempts to mate. We've seen bungs with pheromones used in the monitoring procedure, but on the scale needed to reduce mating in the wild, these would be impractical and uneconomic. However, experiments on the moth's response to different combinations of pheromones did reveal another possibility. Vapour from a bung containing a high concentration of the long-range attractant was sucked into the tunnel. It mixed with the perfume given off by the decoy. The moths became excited and collected near the source of the pheromones, but cannot locate the female. The overdosing has masked the effect of the decoy. In their confusion, males either lose interest or drop exhausted on the floor of the tunnel. So normal mating behaviour could perhaps be disrupted by spraying areas with the long-range attractant. This technique has not yet been developed on a field scale. But there are other possibilities. Dead caterpillars revealed an enemy that has great potential as an agent of biological control. A virus was isolated that was specific to Lepidoptera. This scanning electron micrograph shows the polyhedral inclusion bodies. Each contains hundreds of virus particles. Inside its protective coat, virus DNA can remain active for months, even years. The virus particles multiply after they've entered the gut cells of a caterpillar. The cells are ruptured and the caterpillar is liquefied. When dead, it may release up to 1,000 million virus particles back into the environment. Economically, the virus is a promising solution because it could operate over more than one season. And because moths lay their eggs early and the eggs hatch synchronously in any one area, there's a real possibility of wiping out the early larvae in just one well-timed spraying. In field tests, the virus spray developed by the Institute of Virology in Oxford produced 100% infection and could be used commercially soon. However, there are other natural enemies scarcely investigated so far. This is an ichneumon, one of several species of insect parasites that lay their eggs in the larvae. Caterpillars are also attacked by ants. And the moths are often eaten by birds or small mammals like shrews. So there is a range of possibilities for biological control using natural killing agents. In the long term, these probably offer the best solution to the survival of the lodgepole pine on the difficult soils of Sutherland.